time Okay, okay. Good morning. I'm Judy Greensman, president of the League of Women Voters in Northern Fairfield County. And our chapter looks forward to this event every year because we are anxious to hear your views about issues that are important in the state and also to the 6 communities that are part of our chapter. We also this morning are welcoming members besides our own league. We invite members of the local chapter of the American Association of University Women, with whom we do programs throughout the year. Members of the Women's Club of Danbury, New Fairfield, we extended an invitation to them. And I also send an invitation to the Richfield League of Women Voters because we do share a few of you with them. Now, unlike a formal debate, our program today provides the opportunity for conversation between our legislators and then, of course, with the people who are watching based on their questions. So here's is the format. I'm going to ask each of you to start a program to speak up to 3 minutes or so about what you consider the priorities that you would like to most discuss and hopefully have some resolution for during this session, and what the critical issues are. And then I'm going, but it's not a debate situation, obviously. So it's really a conversation that we're going to have. And then I will ask members of our league and people who are watching to submit questions. I have some questions from the league, and I'll start off with 1 or 2 questions from the league, and then we'll take questions from people who are watching. And if anybody watching would like to submit a question, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen, or depending on your device, wherever you have the chat function. So I have decided to be very left-brained about it, and I'm going to go in alphabetical order by last name. So I'm going to ask each of our legislators to introduce themselves and tell us what district they represent, and then give us about 3 minutes time of what you would like to most accomplish this spring. So I'm going to start with Rocky Valley Brennan.
Not here.
Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. I looked at my number 1. I can see he's not here. Then I'm going to ask, and our number 2 is not here yet. Okay, those are the 2 we're missing. So I will ask Patrick Callahan.
Well, quickly, I'm out of the on deck circle, I guess.
Mea culpa.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see everyone, and it's good to see Rachel and Farley and Marty here. And we welcome them to every forum we take part in. And I'm the representative for the 108th district, which is pretty much behind me and over my right shoulder by your view. And so I have Sherman, New Fairfield, a little bit of New Milford, and a northern part of Danbury. And it's my 2nd term. I'm happy to be here. It's already quite busy, quite a bit of work, as Senator Harding and I can attest to, a very long screening process yesterday. But as the session goes on, very long, the definition changes. I do have some pieces of legislation that I've introduced this year and some priorities. But starting by what's behind me, we have some issues at Candlewood Lake. This late in the year, we've got some blue-green algae blooms. We have almost 0 vegetation in the lake, so there's nothing pulling nutrients out of the lake. And if we're having algae blooms in the middle of winter, I'm concerned with what's going to happen in the middle of summer. So Steve and I are talking about that with all of the Environment Committee, and that will be coming up. But I'm quite concerned, of course, talking to the Candlewood Lake Authority and deep about it as well. As far as just a couple pieces of legislation that are important to me. There's a simple one. Last year, everyone may remember that we passed a bill that if there's a fatality, police have a finite amount of time to contact the next of kin. And I've asked for legislation that if someone's getting a state ID or a driver's license, just simply ask them to put in an emergency contact to make it easier for police to make that contact and have that information at their fingertips. Also, some legislation regarding, I've sent to the Finance Committee a bill asking for a personal income tax deduction for our college students up to $10,000 a year for principal and interest on not just college students, any secondary education loans. So you could be truck driver or tradesman, but we need these people in our state. We need them to stay here. So don't know where that's going to go. Of course, all these things are subject to trying to make it out of committee. Also asked for a exemption from sales tax for health clubs. We're taxing people who are trying to go out there and stay healthy. And I've asked for Finance Committee to take a look at that. But that's just I'm not going to read through the whole list, but that's just a bit of what I'm looking for. Several issues will be coming before Environment Committee and Judiciary Committee, which I serve on, and I was also put on appropriations this year. And usually when I tell people that, I get a chuckle, and usually when I tell them I'm the ranking member of Environment, I get a chuckle because they're very hard lifts. So not to take more than my 3 minutes, I'm sure being the first person out of the box as I hear everybody else talk, I'll remember things I should have said. But good morning to everyone, and I'll turn it back over to you, Judith.
Okay, then I would like to ask Rachel Gillespie to speak to us about her concerns for the spring.
Okay.
Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Rachel Chalesky. I was just recently elected to my first term on the state legislature, representing a large piece of Danbury. I was appointed to the Appropriations Committee, the Education Committee, and the Transportation Committee, having served on our local Danbury Board of Education for over 5 years. Education is a top priority for me. Danbury Public Schools have not received their fair share of state education funding in a very long time. I'm hopeful this session. I see many. I've proposed legislation to fully implement the education cost sharing formula, and along with many of my colleagues. So I'm hopeful, working within that committee, that we can finally overhaul the way public schools across the state are funded by the state. Transportation, we've not had someone within our delegation serve on transportation in a long time. So I'm just looking to be an advocate for our far corner of the state on that, in terms of the conditions of our state roads and our rail system. I ran, to limit the tax burden on our residents with the high inflation that we're experiencing. I feel now's the time that we can pause some of the new taxes that are being implemented, such as the gas tax and the highway use tax, grocery food items, and as well as pause the evergreen salary raises that were implemented last term for our state elected officials and some of our top state elected officials. Let me see. Also, what I heard in speaking with our neighbors, that taxes on Social Security and pensions. And I see many of my colleagues have proposed legislation around that as well, to help, our retirees, our seniors, to afford to continue to live in the state of Connecticut. So I think that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lots to talk about this morning for sure. I would like to next call on Marty Plancello.
Good morning. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Marty Fonsello, I'm from Brookfield. My district includes, in addition to Brookfield, pieces of Bethel and Newtown. There are a lot of items I submitted in the proposed legislation category this year, and just quickly, I'll just bring up a couple of them for you. First of all, I support our law enforcement people, whether it's state or local police. I want them to be allowed to do their jobs and to not be afraid about doing their jobs. We want to make sure we pay them appropriately. And I'm concerned about efforts directed towards recruiting and retention of them. I have some other ideas I'll go over in addition to the financial ones. There are some non-financial issues that can be addressed as we go along, and I want to work with them. The state police we had speak to us the other day, so I'd like to speak to them about that. Looking at the demographics, I want to keep seniors in Connecticut. They want to stay here, but it's pretty costly, as we know, to live here. So I want to do what we can to help them, and I want to keep young people here too, because there's kind of a dent in our bell-shaped curve from around age 25 to 40, which are primary parental ages, right? So it's going to have an impact on our schools and the numbers of children in the schools. Concerned in the tax and financial areas. Again, I'm looking to lower taxes wherever possible, eliminate them if we can. Gasoline tax, truckers tax. I'm looking to give relief again to some of the seniors, retired pay, veterans with their military pay or retirement. And I want to make heating and energy affordable. This is a huge issue this year. So I want to do everything we can to make it easier for them to live here. Regarding education, which is one of the committees I'm on, so my aging, education, and appropriations. So education, I want to ensure that the students get the education that they need, the reading, writing, math, science, at the levels they need to be trained at, appropriate for their age group. Regarding financing, I'm looking locally here to come up with some financing for a communications system for our town, for law enforcement and fire department. Then I have kind of a special issue regarding cemeteries. And I'm referring to not the big ones that are owned by, say, the diocese or some church, but the smaller ones you see all over New England, some of which are in disrepair over the years, and they go back maybe hundreds of years. I want to make it so that the state can find owners or somehow take control of the cemeteries when necessary, if board members decide they don't want to work there anymore. But most of these people are volunteers. There's money involved, there's planning involved, investing involved. And if they want to leave, say Connecticut, and turn it over to somebody, I'd like the state to come up with a means for taking over the cemeteries.
Oh, thank you.
So those are some of the big issues.
I'm going to interrupt and move on and
Yes, go ahead.
Give everyone a chance. And then I have to say, we've never had anyone talk about our cemeteries, and that's a very interesting idea to try to preserve our heritage.
Certainly,
As a
the customers
retired
don't
history
complain.
teacher, I applaud you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, good morning, Bob. Bob
Good
Godfrey
morning.
is our next
How
speaker.
are you?
Bob, were you here when I said we're talking for about 3 minutes?
Yes,
And we'd like to hear very much what you think are the major issues you'd like to see.
good
addressed.
morning, and thank you once again for doing this. This is one of the highlights, certainly, of my year, being able to have this kind of chat with the members of the League of Women Voters and others. It's a very positive thing. I'm Bob Godfrey. I'm entering my 18th term. I represent downtown Danbury and the neighborhoods around it. I'm a little different from my other colleagues here. I'm an urban legislator. They're more suburban, even in Danbury. I've got the old city part. They have the old town part going back a bunch of years. So my focus is a little different. I serve on the Judiciary Committee, have every term, my entire stay in the House of Representatives. I'm where I also serve as the Deputy Speaker pro tempore. I'm on executive and legislative nominations. A little bit about that in a minute. The Regulations Review Committee, which sounds boring, but is a critically important part of the checks and balances in our state constitution, and the Legislative Management Committee, which hasn't really met in this century. So that's one of the easier ones. The I have a lot of concerns. Several people have already mentioned the Lake Candlewood stuff, for example, when the commissioner of DEEP, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, was before the Executive Nominations Committee about a week ago. I did raise the issue of Lake Candlewood, which, interestingly enough, is both an environmental issue and an energy issue. I was talking specifically about the deoxification, oxygenation of the lake. Because something has eaten all of the plants. Oh, carp. So bringing that to the commissioner's attention, and also I brought to her attention my concern that as we talk about energy generating sources, I made quite a pitch for fuel cells, which of course there's a big company here in Danbury. Headquarters Research and Development. They have a manufacturing plant up in Torrington. There's another company in South Windsor. So we've put together a bipartisan caucus, I guess, to work on those issues. There's been a lot of talk about tax relief. That's a very good thing. There's been a lot of talk about increasing spending. I know you can't increase spending over the amount of revenue you have coming in. I threw in a bill, not that I expected to go anyplace, because the processes of the General Assembly are bills on taxes and spending die, and those two committees do their own bills. I just threw one rolling back the sales tax rate from 6.35% back to 6%. We'll see, because I want the sales tax to be part of all of the debate and discussion that we have this year. There were a couple of issues my colleagues raised. We already don't tax Social Security benefits up to $75,000 for people who make under $75,000 a year, and we're phasing out the income tax on pensions for that same group. We're about in the middle of that. That's something I've worked on. I have a very large senior citizen population, and I am one. So that's a concern of mine.
Bob, I'm going to interrupt.
Sure.
And keep us moving. And then if you would like to talk about some more things, we'll have time for that. But I want to make sure in the three minutes time slot, since people have to leave, that everyone gets a chance. I'm going to ask Stephen Harding to speak next.
Great. Thank you, Judith. And good morning, everybody. I am Steve Harding, a former state rep as of last year, now a state senator, and I represent 18 towns, essentially from my hometown of Brookfield all the way north to the Massachusetts border. It's the biggest geographical Senate district in the state. So a lot of ground to cover, and a lot of mileage on my car, but that's okay. The towns that I represent that are pertinent to this group generally is, as I mentioned, is Brookfield. I share half of New Fairfield with Senator Kushner, who's here, and also now have Sherman in my district. And I do apologize in advance, as Representative Callahan mentioned. Both him and myself are going to Sherman School for an event around 11, so we do have to duck out just a little bit early. And but I really look forward to this every year. Briefly, I think a lot of my colleagues mentioned the priorities, and obviously I have similar priorities. And Representative Callahan mentioned Candlewood Lake as a ranking member on the Environment Committee with Representative Callahan as the House ranking. That certainly will be a priority of our committee this year, in ensuring funding to address the aquatic invasive species, which is a growing issue, whether it be zebra mussels, whether it be blue-green algae issues. The health of the lake is a priority to this area of the state, as it should be. We have the boat stamp program that we put in a couple years back, which is a charge on your boat registration, and there was supposed to be, and there is, an out-of-state fee for out-of-state boaters. Like a boat stamp is what it's called colloquially, but we have some issues over enforcement. We don't know, and it's hard for DEEP because they're strapped, and they don't have the officers with the funding they're getting to really put out in the lake to actually enforce the out-of-state boaters from putting into this program and providing this critical funding to the lake. So that's something we'll be tackling this session. It's important to me. I know it's important to Representative Callahan, and I would argue probably everyone else on this call. We know how important the lake is to our communities. Adding on to that, I mean, just to the overall discussion we've had about affordability, this one of the biggest jobs that we have as legislators, as we all know, is the budget, and it is a budget year. So in terms of investments, I think all of us were meeting with Ability Beyond yesterday, and some of the funding issues that they're trying to tackle, and trying to get some funds to them from the state to help a lot of these nonprofit organizations operate. So making sure that some of the funding that we now do have, because we're not running such a deficits that we had before, are good long-term investments and responsible investments for the state, and at the same time making sure that the tax burden on the men and women of the state is not overly burdensome, and making sure that we can help address some of the affordability issues that we're seeing, whether it be at the supermarket or the department store when you buy clothes for your family, etc. You're seeing it everywhere. So I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to tackle both of these issues and many more as we get into this legislative session. And I want to thank the league for all they do and for all their advocacy and for hosting this forum. It's really an exciting morning every year you do this. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay. So I would like to move at good morning, Senator Wong. And so Tony Wong will give us his priorities for the spring. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Judith, and thank you to the league. It's good to see all of our colleagues together, and we don't always get to spend time. I represent Bethel now, as well as Newtown. And I think for me, the issues are kind of broad. I'll go broad on this. It's about affordability, the ability to live in the state. And I'll just tick off issues that relate to that I know we're going to work very hard to address this session in a bipartisan basis, I hope. I think the first one for me is tackling utility cost, holding transparency and accountability to our utilities, because unfortunately residents are going to get a sticker shock when they see their utility bills this coming month, and we have to really address the whys and how, and really work to contain it. And I know in this case we are truly focused on a bipartisan basis to solving this issue. The other is truly understanding the impact of inflation. Even though the national story maybe it's easing, the pocketbook affecting people is going to the grocery stores, going out to restaurants, and how it affects all of us have really not been felt. But ultimately, when you're struggling to be able to make ends meet. The other issue that we're talking about, and it's encouraging, right, with the new session, we'll see how it goes, but there's a real bipartisan focus on issues. Utility cost, we're looking at taxation, sales tax relief, but also income tax relief, senior tax relief. They're all critical issues. But I caution the fact that you hear so much about, a robust rainy day fund and that we have excess revenue. Ultimately, we're at an unusual time because a lot of our money has been supplemented by the COVID federal dollars in the billions, and also the fact that we have been adapting to a new normal and inflationary cost of sales tax receipts. So I think we have to be very cautious that the money that we've been able to save and the economic stability that we have is welcome and valued, but we have to take a look at how we maintain spending caps vis-a-vis how we bond, how we spend, and how we manage our budget moving into the future. We can't look at all this new money and say, let's spend it all. Households don't do that. I think the other issue that I have is a focus on affordability that ties into it is health insurance cost, the ability to be able to post-COVID for people to be able to be in a position to get health care when they're not well and their loved ones are sick, that healthcare should not be prohibitively costly, that people have to do without it versus choosing putting food on their table. The other focus on affordability I tie into is job creation and helping our businesses. It's all about being able to give people an opportunity to earn an income to be able to stay and live and prosper in Connecticut. So as you can see, the affordability kind of encompasses all of a lot of the things that we do when we kind of represent our constituency. Another area that I'll be focused on is, as the ranking member on transportation, we want to really focus on infrastructure. When I think about infrastructure, our roads, our rails, and our bridges, we also need to encompass bikes, pedestrians, walkers, that kind of a focus. And when we look at transportation as a whole, COVID has taught for a lot of us to appreciate walking and enjoying our natural habitats. But when I think of infrastructure and transportation, it isn't just about roads and cars. It's really about safety. We have a program called Vision Zero that we're going to really be focused on. That's very comprehensive and many times be controversial. We're going to look at economics, how we can get people to and from work, but also it's a quality of life. Nobody wants to spend 45 minutes sitting in traffic. I think those areas kind of encompass a broad base, but for us in the Senate, there's 36 of us. We kind of get delved into a lot of the issues that confront us. I'm going to give a big shout out to Bob Godfrey, because when I first joined 14 years ago, Bob Godfrey taught a class that I still remember and utilize of what the General Assembly is all about and how we work to do a better job for our constituents. The last thing I'll leave is the fact that COVID is still amongst us. It's a new evolution and dynamic. There's so much emotion coming in and about, but I think we have to take it very cautiously. We have to base our decision on medical data, and we have to be cognizant of the emotional feelings of people that oppose one way or the other. We need to have that deliberation, but ultimately, I think that the most important thing is for us to get back into a legislative body, for us to engage, for us to give people an opportunity, whether that is in person at the Capitol, which is welcome, but if people feel like it, like we're doing today, to be able to zoom in and virtually be able to state their opinion. I think this is going to be a new generation of how we deliberate and go into representative government. And we're still working out the kinks on that. But nevertheless, I think the positive and the excitement I have is, we're all here today because we're Zooming. It would have been a chore. We would have done it to meet in person. And there's that balance between meeting in person, developing the rapport and the relationship versus being able to have an opportunity to be represented and to be engaged.
Well,
So,
we appreciate what you're saying, and I at this point, you've given me an opening to say, make a comment I have made. I think at all of our, in the past several years, events that we've had this webinar, is that, and we league members have talked about it after the fact, that we are so proud of our delegation. We are 6 towns, and we see the representatives that we have from Hartford that go to Hartford, and we are very proud that our delegation really represents, we think, the true spirit of democratic government. Of course, that's with a small d, that you need to talk, and that bipartisan word of conversation and talking about things is really music to our ears, that there's honest conversation going on among our representatives. And I just want you all to know that we in the league are very proud of that.
well, I appreciate that. And the final closing thought I had was, and we appreciate the league. I think the final thing we'll leave at is the Secretary of State just proposed early voting to be 10 days. I think access to voting, which the league has been so active in, is important. And I would measure it by having processes in place to ensure that every vote is protected, and that we maintain a process that is manageable, that is repeatable and secure. So early voting is going to be a conversation. Again, goes back to what I said about the emotion.
That's going to be my first question, Senator.
Well, those are things that are relevant
so
to
you beat me
me.
to the
So
punch
thank
there.
you very much.
Okay, thank you. And now I'd like to ask Julie Kushner to tell us what she sees as priorities and whom she represents. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Julie Kushner. I'm the state senator for the 24th district, and that is a major portion of New Fairfield, all of Danbury, and a significant portion of Ridgefield. I am currently serving my 3rd term, and I serve as the chair of the Labor and Public Employees Committee, vice chair of Public Health, vice chair of Children. I also serve as a member of executive and legislative nominations, education, and appropriations. And I'm very excited about the upcoming year and the work that we have before us. There's been a lot of talk about the budget, and clearly that will be a major focus of our legislative session. What I see is a great need in the state to really reinforce and lift up the services that we provide as a state to our citizenry, whether that's addressing the housing crisis, the homelessness crisis, the childcare crisis, the education crisis. Part of this is because we're recovering from COVID, and there certainly is still the need to address some of the impacts of COVID that have really jeopardized our population, whether it's the emotional and social behavioral issues that we see in the schools, the learning gaps that we still have as a result of COVID. Certainly now with evictions back on, we're seeing more homelessness. We see a crisis in getting through to 211. There's a lot going on. We did go to Ability Beyond yesterday and heard about the need for the nonprofits to be supported in their addressing our communities, being a major resource in our community for disabled young people and adults. And so we really have tremendous need, and I'm very excited about the opportunity to address this. Even though we have surpluses, we know that ongoing costs will need to be addressed through balancing our revenue and our expenses. To that end, I am a member of Recovery for All, which is a group of faith leaders, labor unions, community organizations, and a large group of legislative champions. And our goal is to make sure that we're bringing in revenue in a way that will address the needs of working families. That means that we do support looking at ways to reduce taxes on working families. Last year we did the child tax rebate. I'd like to see that continued as a permanent tax rebate and increase in value for working families. But at the same time, and I support the idea of reducing some of the taxes on seniors and the experience that they're experiencing with their pensions and annuities. But at the same time, we need to look at ways to bring in new revenue so that we can balance those needs of our communities. And I do believe that there are those in our state who are very wealthy individuals that could afford to help out more, as well as corporations that aren't paying taxes now that we could certainly look to help our state really thrive. I am interested in education issues. I currently chair the working group on indoor air quality in our public schools. This is another great example where we allocated $150 million last year that is now being given out as grant programs to schools for upgrading their HVAC systems. But we know that this is a huge task, and so we've been studying it. We'll be making recommendations at the end of the month. But to me, this is another area of investment that we really need to put major resources into our education system. We know that children don't learn well when they don't have good air quality. We know that it really impacts the people who work in these buildings as well. So it's a challenging question and a very costly item as well. I am interested in the retention and recruitment of teachers and health professionals, and that's certainly something that we'll be addressing in both the Education Committee and Public Health Committees. I think one of the things we have to look at with health professionals particularly is state staffing ratios, and particularly staff. I think that I know that's going to be your first question, early voting, but it is a very key.
You know that.
We can't, this is our opportunity to make sure that we strengthen our democracy by making voting available to everyone. And that it has clearly been something where we've fallen behind in Connecticut, and now we have the opportunity to fix that. And I think we need to get it right the first time, which to me means making sure that everyone has the greatest opportunity to come in and vote. And I know the Secretary of State put out the 10-day proposal. I personally think that giving workers 2 weekends to come out and vote would be much better, because that's a greater opportunity for those who work on a regular Monday through Friday schedule. So there's a lot before us as a legislature, and I look forward to getting to work.
More to talk about. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Okay, and I think last in our introductory remarks here will be Farley Santos.
Good morning, Judy. Thank you so much for the invitation. And going last always gives you a little more context, because now I'm going to copy everything that everyone else said. But don't confuse me with another Representative Santos who just.
No.
But I'm Farley Santos. I grew up here in Danbury, and I'm passionate about this city. I served on the Danbury Board of Education, actually got elected with Rachel back in 2017. We served together there. I serve currently on the Danbury City Council, and obviously last November I was elected as a state representative for the 109th District, which is the northern part of Danbury, biggest part of the town that actually borders Candlewood Lake. So similar to Representative Callahan, I'm very interested in lake issues. The carp problem there and what that's causing as an effect to the lake is something that I'm very involved in, and then also want to be able to address, right? So working in a bipartisan fashion to address those issues for those constituents there. What got me involved in the first place back in 2016 was Danbury Public Schools. I was fortunate to have grown up here and gone through our public school system. And as parents know, when you have a child, your life sort of changes. And I wanted to make sure that my daughter had the best opportunity and the best public education possible, but not just for her, but every single one of our children. When we currently have our middle schoolers in single digits in proficiency in mathematics, that's a problem. It's a problem for our future here in Danbury, and it's a problem for our viability. Danbury has notoriously been underfunded for our public school education. yes, on the state level, but also on the municipal level, that they have not done enough to fund our schools here. And then because of that, you create, 40 or more $1 million shortfalls. And you see the struggles in the schools up front if you go to visit them. You see kids in extra study hall classes, teachers teaching classes with Rosetta Stone. You see infrastructure issues within the schools that have not been addressed. So I'm quite passionate about that. Aside from that, I'm really looking forward to diving into the details on issues. I serve on the banking committee. I'm vice chair of banking. I'm on the Veterans and Military Affairs Committee. That is an issue that I'm most passionate about. While I'm not a veteran, I have many friends who are, and just seeing what they go through and the need for better services for them is something I'm quite passionate about. I'm also on general law, which is a great committee to touch on several different issues. We have liquor permit issues coming before the committee. We have cannabis issues coming before the committee, and various other issues that really make an impact on people's lives. And when I campaigned last fall, what I heard over and over again is, how do we make living in Connecticut more affordable for working families, but then also for our seniors, right? Who we need to remember, folks who worked here, grew up here, raised their kids here, worked here and volunteered here, now want to be able to afford to retire here. So maintaining the focus on working families, maintaining the focus on our seniors, making sure that we have the best quality health care for them, that we provide the services that we need for them is some of my top priorities. I want to thank you again for having us here today.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And of course, I do have some questions from the league. I'm going to ask two questions and then see if there are any questions from people who are watching. And I also have questions that were sent to me ahead of time and from league members. So the first question I do want to ask is about early voting, because it did pass on the November ballot to be instituted, but of course it has to have a legal framework. The legislature has to decide how it's going to be implemented. So given the fact that we really don't have much time, I would like anyone here who would like to make a comment about it to be very brief, like just a couple of sentences, a sentence or two about, and you don't have to answer every question if you would rather not, but the question is, what are your ideas about how it should be implemented or configured? Just very, very briefly.
Judy, I'll jump in because I didn't add that as part of my remarks, but it happens to be something I'm quite passionate about. Connecticut being one of 4 states throughout the country that does not have some kind of early voting is a problem. And like you said, small d democracy that we should be in enhancing abilities for people to vote is something that I think that absolutely we should do. Senator Kushner makes a great point about affording people the ability to go vote on weekends and extending that time frame before election day so that we can vote. I read something yesterday that Secretary of State says about 10 days. Let's work with that. How do we make it so that people who are working, who have lives, who are really short on time to be able to get out to vote, because at the end of the day, we represent them, right? And we should have everyone coming out.
Anyone want to add anything? Bob?
Yes, thank you. Voting should be safe, voting should be secure, and voting should be convenient. And I think we're taking 2 huge steps. One in this early voting, and 2, hopefully next state election, there'll be a constitutional amendment to provide for no excuse absentee voting, a position that the League of Women Voters has strongly advocated on over the years. The early voting, of course, the debate's going to be on the details. Secretary of the State has suggested 10 days, others have said 2 weeks, some have said 3 days. So that's going to be part of the debate. But I think it's the other details that is going to be the biggest part of the discussion. Okay, you start to 10 days out. Where will you vote? In Danbury, for example, we have 7 voting precincts. I think 6 of them are in schools. Now, you're not going to close down schools for 10 days. So where are you going to vote? In small towns, the discussion is, we'll do it at wherever the town clerk or the registrars of voters are located, town hall. In larger cities like Danbury, having 40,000+ voters traipsing into City Hall, which is only open 4 days a week in Danbury, is going to be an issue. That's going to take a lot of, I think, a lot of collaboration among my colleagues to try and work it out. But those are the kind of things that I foresee being the focus of the debate.
Okay. Anybody want to add anything else? Not, I'll go on to another question.
I just,
Okay, yes, yes, Julie.
I think Representative Godfrey really hit an important note on this. I believe the reason why there was such a strong mandate for early voting is because during COVID, people got the experience of early voting through the no excuse absentee balloting. And it was very convenient with the ballot boxes in Danbury in 3 separate locations. And so I think that I hope that we can move that issue forward, because I think that will resolve a lot of the concerns that will be raised about where do you have the voting, as the Representative Godfrey pointed out. I think we have a short period of time where we're going to have to address those issues, but hopefully if we go to no excuse absentee balloting, then a lot of that will get resolved much more easily. And so I'm really hopeful and excited about these opportunities to really strengthen our democracy.
Thank you.
I'll
Does
add
anyone want to
it,
comment on the no, either the early voting question or the no absentee balloting question that's going to come up? Would
Judy?
anyone else like to make a comment?
And if anyone-
I would like to
Yeah.
add the fact
Yeah.
that it's an opportunity, right? We passed a constitutional amendment. We're having this discussion. I think everything's on the table, but we have to be cautious. That being said, I know we're going to have to replace our voting machines now. I think that's a wonderful opportunity for us to reevaluate a host in addition to early voting and the logistics of it. One of the things that I just proposed with Democratic Senator Kathy Austin is evaluating ranked choice voting to be able to kind of create a different way of opening up the democratic process, because we talk a lot about early voting and early access and the mechanics, but we cannot miss the fact that one of the most important role that the League of Women Voters have is informing voters, because one of the challenges is, yes, we're making it easier for everybody to vote, but if they are uninformed and do not have opportunities and choices of a representative candidacy instead of the simple 1 or 2 individuals that they have, you're defeating the purpose and the goal of greater voter participation and access. So I hope that when we have this conversation about the logistics of early voting, that we also reevaluate the opportunity to afford more people, one, to get involved, but encourage them to be more informed about the candidate. Because unfortunately, in this day and age of gaslighting and national politics, issues take over rather than really understanding who the candidates are and who they vote for. Look, I know Representative Santos brought up the fact that, you know, we were able to elect down in Long Island somebody like Mr. Santos, who had a record of deceit and all that. But the fact is, voters did not find out or listen or hear about their candidates. They voted along, quote, party line or on a one issue agenda. So we open up voting. That's fantastic. And I think it's been bipartisanly supported. But we have to be very cautious about the misinformation, the gaslighting that occurs, and have voters be informed instead of simply just pulling a lever based upon an issue or a party affiliation. So I hope we have that opportunity to also engage in that conversation instead of just simply talking about the mechanics of early voting, but the responsibility that increased participation voters have to find out who their candidates are and what the issues are.
No, I couldn't have said it better myself. I would like to just interject here before I ask my next question. I was going to end the program this morning promptly at 11 and give all of you who are here a chance to make any comments you maybe didn't have a chance to make after hearing questions and so forth. But I also was going to, and I'm saying this now because two of you have to leave. I was also going to say that is there a topic you would like our chapter to provide for the public in a future this is speaking to what Senator Wong just said. This might take the form of a featured speaker or a panel discussion. There are many topics that are being raised this morning, and the topic of ranked voting has been in the news more of late. And we on the league board have talked about a program perhaps on ranked voting with some speakers. So just while you're listening, if you have any thoughts, just jot down to pass along to me. You can email me if you have anything that you think the people in our towns, the voters in our towns should be more informed about. I'm really happy to take that suggestion from you. So the next question I want to ask is, I'm dealing with climate change here. What are your ideas to incentivize citizens to mitigate the effects of pollution? What should be done to incentivize companies to be more green and to discourage practices that are not? There was a front page, big headline in the News Times earlier this week here in Danbury that said Connecticut produces more trash than it can handle. And it gave figures of how many tons of trash we export every year because we have no way of disposing of it in the state. And I'm going to say parenthetically, when we had this conversation, we have members who have young children. And the point needs to be made that all the citizens, not only in our state, but in the country, who are under 18 right now, of course, don't get to vote for candidates based on how they feel about the kind of surroundings they're going to grow up in their lifetime. So the burden is on us, or over 18 and over, to do this. And I read recently that Connecticut, I think this is still true, Connecticut has the largest number of square acres, miles, whatever, of open space and parkland of any state in the union. And that was and I would stand corrected on that if that's not correct. I think I read it about a year or two ago. And we have beautiful parks, so we have green. But I think many of you have talked about young people and affordability of housing for young people and keeping young people here with jobs and so forth. But for people with children, and I speak now of the message I got from one of our members, the next generation growing up, what is being talked about in terms of this waste disposal problem and other environmental issues here in the state? I would be interested to hear if you have any comments on it.
I can chime in if that's all right. Because this is something we are going to be tackling in the Environment Committee this upcoming session. It's no longer a pending crisis when it comes down to waste management in the state. It is a crisis. We're in the crisis currently, particularly as you go north in my district, where a lot of communities were relying upon the Mira plant that is closing in Hartford. A lot of that trash, that waste removal, is getting trucked out of state. So not only is it more expensive for those communities and the tipping fees they're paying to haul the waste out of state, but it's also environmentally unfriendly. It's a loss on both ends. And so we need to work with DEEP and make critical investments to our waste management here in the state of Connecticut, whether it be working with energy efficient and energy friendly, environmentally friendly plants, and infrastructure. One area that's exciting to many of us in the environment community and the committee is anaerobic digestion, and the food to waste energy infrastructure that we have in the state. However, we haven't made enough progress in terms of implementing that infrastructure. There's only 2, I believe, maybe even 3 tops plants and anaerobic digesters that are operating in the state of Connecticut. One of them being in Southington. I think that might even be the closest one to this area. We need to look at making the permitting process easier and quicker to allow these anaerobic digesters and other energy infrastructure, waste to energy infrastructure to be implemented. Because again, I think what it's coming down to here is that trucking and hauling our waste out of the state is just not an option. And I know in the short term, some haulers are utilizing that just because they don't really have any other resources or ability to do anything else. But that needs to stop. And the state of Connecticut can play a critical role in helping to stop that and utilizing the waste energy right here in the state. I think, there's been a couple proposals that have come before the Environment Committee, and Pat and I have screened them, that are exciting in terms of utilizing food banks. We see far too often food being discarded, before the expiration date. It doesn't meet a certain quality standard. And it's terrible to see all this food that is healthy, could be eaten because it doesn't look good or whatever the case may be, to be simply thrown away. So working in conjunction with our food banks and other organizations in the state to fully utilize the food that we have in our state instead of simply throwing it away. So it's a collaborative effort. It should be, and it has been, a bipartisan effort. It should continue to be, and I know it will be. And it's something that we need to work with DEEP to really have a strong investment on enhancing our waste to energy infrastructure right here in the state of Connecticut in efficient ways and environmentally friendly ways. And we have an opportunity to move that forward here in the next few years and to address this crisis that we currently have regarding waste management. So I thank you for that question. It's vitally important.
Would anyone else like to comment on either the waste disposal or the measures to encourage business practices in the state and
Just quickly,
everyone else to create less waste? So yes.
sorry, Judith. Before I have to head up to Sherman, I just wanted to really quickly. So while we weren't in session, I was visiting some of these recycling facilities, and we also have to do a better job of getting contaminants out of that cycle. And it was a disgusting day I spent with Representative Gresco and Representative Reyes going through what they're dealing with is trying to get this recyclable material aftermarket. The contaminants are preventing that. So it's one of the things we have to do a better job at. And as far
Can I
as
ask a question?
Go ahead. You want to come with me next time?
What kind of contaminants are you talking about?
Contaminants are, if you've got cardboard and it gets more than 30% water content, it's no longer marketable. So any contaminants.
I just was curious what you meant.
And there's trash being mixed in with it. So it's labor intensive, and it's very labor intensive to get it to the point where it has an aftermarket. And as Senator Harding, I'm going to keep saying that, we're looking for extended producer responsibility on the Environment Committee as well. So to do the best we can to get everything we can out of our waste stream. And thank you, Judith and everyone. I'm going to throw on a coat and run up to Sherman now. So I appreciate the chance to see everyone this morning and speak.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Would anyone else like to respond to that question? Otherwise, I see more. I will go on to the next question. Okay. So my next question would be, How would you propose to reduce energy costs for Connecticut residents? A slightly popular question at the moment. Would anyone like to respond to that? What relief would you see for the cost of energy use here in the state? Anything you'll be talking about? Or is that too loaded a question right now? I don't know. Anybody have a thought about that? Yes, Senator Wyden.
I don't want to take up a lot of time, but the Senate Republican just made a proposal in looking at cost containment, and it's split up into two specific issues of energy generation, where 100% of the cost increases is been derived lately, and that's the justification the utilities have offered versus the administration and the distribution side. So the utilities have two unique models, right? We looked and tackled the issue in regards to how we create generation, to look at alternative renewable sources, but nevertheless, hydro and wind and solar we're years away from meeting the needs that we have. What people don't realize in the state that nearly 75% of current energy use are derived from the Millstone nuclear power plant out in Eastern Connecticut. Now, nuclear is the best non-carbon, energy production. I know it's nuclear and people kind of frown upon it, but the reality is, if we're truly looking at balancing between environmental climate change initiatives versus energy generation with the increased needs that we have, we may want to look at alternative sources. Another is to increase the flow of power and pipelines from Quebec Hydro, which is Canadian, and increasing pipelines through Vermont. That is another issue. I think to really look at alternative sources of energy. It's not just a Connecticut problem on an energy production side. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, the whole New England ISO network is dependent on buying energy. Connecticut's unique because 20 plus years ago, and I see Bob nodding because he was there when we decided to deregulate and take all of our power companies, Eversource and UI, from energy generation. So the power plants that you see driving down through the roads through Connecticut, none of it is owned by UI or Eversource. It's owned by Duke Energy, Pacific Gas, all the array of outside companies. We have to buy that from them. So that's one of the things that we're looking at in regards to, do we want to take back energy generation? That's a big, heavy lift. The second side is equally important, is fact that distribution. Our two utilities have a monopoly in regards to the grid control and moving from the grid to the various households that utilize the energy. The second hidden cost is the fact that legislatively, we have passed on environmental, climate change, energy conservation costs that utilities manage and tack on. So for those people that are watching, look at your bills. It's not only just the energy generation side, which is 100% increased. Take a look at the added cost, conservation, environment. There's a proposal by Senate Republicans to say, let us be more honest and transparent. Take those fees off of the bill and put that in as a budgetary item of discussion. If the legislative really feels that those issues are critically important, let's budget for it and take that off of the consumer where they have a choice. Another factor is to ask our utilities to say, instead of having 100% of it being buffeted by consumers on a generation side, I always equate this to our restaurants right now. Inflationary cost has raised bread, cheese, bacon, and eggs to 3 times the percentage. If our restaurants were able to pass on that cost directly onto the consumer, like the utilities are doing right now, we would have $20 burgers, right? The consumer will revolt against that. So restaurants absorb the cost and decrease their margins. Our utilities right now bear no part of that increase. 100% of that energy increase due to natural gas is directly impacting consumers and their bills. The other side of the distribution side and the Wall Street gains that they have go untouched. So my ask is, how do we merge that in greater transparency and accountability, that their way of doing business has to be merged in, and they don't get buffeted by the protection of the consumer bearing the cost of their cost of doing business. I hope I've been able to simplify a little bit with some of the recommendations, But the reality is something needs to be done. And as I said earlier, it is a bipartisan effort. I think our utilities not only have been able to be a benefit of direct costs and consumer payment, but let's be honest, their customer relationship dynamic is below average. And I'm being kind. You know, the frustration of power restoration and their ability to communicate and represent the consumers that pay their bills is woeful. And I think that's another part. I don't think we can legislate that, but ultimately with greater accountability, greater transparency, and greater kind of opportunities that we can demand greater accountability from those organizations. I
Well,
hope I didn't go on
thank
too
you.
long. I
Yeah.
hope I didn't confuse
Yeah,
people.
thank you for explaining that so well. I think it's complicated, and I think you spoke correctly when you said a lot of people living in the state, consumers, just don't understand the whole power issue, where it comes from, who's making the profits. So thank you very much for explaining that. But yes.
Tony's right. The deregulation, which came out of the Rowland administration, he pushed it very hard, and the argument was that making the utilities give up their generation facilities would incentivize smaller companies from doing smaller generating facilities around the state, and that prices would drop. None of that happened. Kind of sold a bill of goods, but who knew? Nobody knew. It was a very popular move back at that time to try and control prices. And then of course, under the Malloy administration, we said we got to shut down coal. We'll move, the decision was at that time, to a fossil fuel that produces less pollution, natural gas. It's true. It still produces pollution, but much, much less than coal or even oil. And we were kind of on the way. At the same time, a lot of homes were converting their oil-based heating systems to also to natural gas, which was cheap at the time. Well, all of that has changed, and we have to take a look at that. And I'm a homeowner. In October, I think I have a small house, 1,400 square feet. In October, I think I paid $70 for my electric bill. In January, it was $111, and it was all on the generation side. Connecticut has no natural resources for fuel to be able to burn to generate electricity, and it's frustrating. I understand we're kind of over the barrel because we have to buy our fuel out of state, and we have no way of controlling those costs directly. We can't pass a bill that says you have to drop your fuel prices, because the fuel suppliers will just say, okay, we won't sell our fuel in Connecticut. Yeah, let's not go down that path. I do like very much the idea of tapping into Hydro-Quebec's generation facility, but there are problems. Number one, you're negotiating with an out of the country entity. And as Tony remarked, we'll need new transmission facilities through Vermont and Massachusetts. I don't know how happy Vermonters would be, for example, with having additional electric lines running through their state that they can't tap into. That's an obstacle that's going to have to be negotiated and dealt with. We have invested in wind power. That's a longer term solution to some of the problems. That's not going to reduce our bills by next month. Longer term, that's a positive. And I'm a Navy veteran, And we've had nuclear powered ships for decades. In fact, I was just looking at a Connecticut history page. I think today's the anniversary of the launch of the USS Nautilus, which was the first nuclear submarine and nuclear powered ship. The technology dealing with nuclear, which I'm not afraid of, has advanced enormously over the years. We're not talking huge facilities like we have at Millstone. We're talking smaller ones scattered about, but there's going to be a NIMBY problem. There's going to be a fear of nuclear problem that we're going to have to wrestle with. And you're right, it's got to be a bipartisan solution. And I think it's going to be part of the longest talks and debates of the year.
Thank you. Thank you very much for also enlightening us about the issue. It's complicated, but we'll all be grateful for whatever you can do. Yes, Senator Krishna, Julie, yes. Yes,
I feel like the other, I mean, Eliza, I won't repeat what's already been said, but I do think what was particularly maddening is that there was a huge outcry after the storm a few years ago when Eversource really did such a poor job of getting the lights turned back on in Connecticut. And we were told at the time that, okay, they're going to pay for that. They're going to pay for it, and we're going to see that there's going to be money returned to consumers for their failure to properly manage the company. And I think what's been so infuriating to so many people is here we are just a couple of years later. We haven't forgotten that. We haven't forgotten the storm. I will say I think they've done better in the recent storms, but also the recent storms haven't been of the proportions that we have experienced and we will experience again. But it doesn't matter. We all remember what happened. And so it's infuriating when now we see these huge rate increases. And I know Senate Democrats did send up a letter to Pura. We really want proper hearings. We want transparency. We really want to expose what's going on here. And, you know, I think that this legislative session, there will be a lot of attention paid to this issue because we're all paying for the problems we have from deregulation, from not moving to other sources of renewable energy. And I do want to say, even though I agree it's going to take a long time to get to wind, I think it's really important that we're moving in that direction. And ultimately, the best solutions may take longer, but they will ultimately pay off, not just for us as consumers, but also for the environment, which is, you know, critically important. So thank you for the opportunity.
And for the younger generation, which I was asked to mention on behalf of some league members with young children. I just want to just take a little side road here for 1 minute with a question that is especially near and dear to members of the league. We feel that Connecticut is a star in terms of its election process by having the Citizens Election Program, the CEP. This is a program where representatives and senators who are running candidates can tap into this fund, this public fund, and not take a lot of money from private sources. I will stand corrected. I don't believe any other state has such a program, but I would stand corrected. That may not be correct. And we in the league are very concerned that it continue because I think it was you, Representative Godfrey, who spoke a couple of years ago about it when I asked about it, and said that prior to the passage of this program, the last day of the legislature would be swamped with lobbyists trying to get last minute things. And the year that this law was passed, it went into effect, this program, the lobbyist virtually vanished. And by the way, I'm not saying anything about anybody's right to lobby or try to get what they would like favorable to them in the legislature. That's not my purpose. But we're talking about the existence of this program, which does provide for a candidate to run on public money. Would anybody like to comment on its security and its existence in the future that's going to be perpetuated?
There certainly hasn't been any attempts to any serious attempts to do away. I think Maine might have a program of public finance. Don't quote me on it. I'm not absolutely sure. There may be other states. It has freed up the entire system. Certainly, it has allowed more people to run for office. As a state representative, I only had to raise $5,800 last year, and I got a total of over $30,000 to spend on my campaign, which is fine in my very small urban district. I have less than 9,000 voters. You go to a place like Ridgefield, and I remember one state rep running in Ridgefield whose plurality was bigger than my turnout. So it varies from district to district. We all represent the same population, but the number of voters is vastly different, and it has allowed people who otherwise would not have been able to run for office to do so. So we could talk about issues that are important to our constituents. He who pays the piper names the tune. If it's the public, they name the tune. If it's lobbyists, well, you have to go to them. And certainly the last few days of session have not been as frantic with people doing advocacy for getting their clients' bills through the legislature, especially if it's passed one house and not the other. I think one of the challenges, and there's been some articles in the last week or two on this, we keep having gubernatorial candidates who self-fund or who don't use the CEP. So tens of millions of dollars get spent by the candidates on the gubernatorial race, not even talking about all of the out-of-state money and other interest groups that do advertising. And so if you've got billionaires being governor, they're interested in stuff for their fellow billionaires. And
Perhaps.
yeah,
Not-
there's
Not necessarily, but perhaps.
If I may quickly add that, the Citizens Elections Program has created great opportunity in balancing the election fields.
Yep.
But Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision,
Yep.
also opened up tremendous loopholes in regards to political action committees that supplement that election kind of guide rails that we talked about. So it really is kind of the challenge that we have is managing political action committees, and both parties and every candidate can possibly be guilty of it. But without Bob and I or anybody who's been through years of this, I'm very eager to hear from the three newly elected individuals and what they thought about Citizens Elections Program, how that factored into their participation in being first-time legislators. If I may, Judith.
Good question. Good question. So there you have it.
I'll quickly jump in there. I thought it levels the playing field a bit. It allows you to do things on a level ground, and you know what your opponent sort of is going to do and spend on. But more importantly, it just makes you a better candidate. I think you're focused on actually the issues and not just the fundraising part of it and trying to try to collect donations in order to run your campaign. You become a better campaigner that way. Could it be enhanced? That perhaps there are ways to enhance it. But I was happy with it. Can't complain.
Anyone else like to speak to it?
I'll just add to that. I agree with Farley. I, never having run for state office, it was quite the learning curve. And I've campaigned on the municipal side of elections, which is very, very different. So for me, as a homemaker, with 2 young children, I don't bring, we rely on my husband to my husband's salary. So I don't think I would have run without, that support. So that's just my perspective there. So thank you.
Thank you for commenting. Yes, yes.
Well, I ran this time, obviously, for the state rep position, but 20 years ago, I was the first selectman. And so the funding, I noticed a huge difference in the dynamics of the funding and the way you conduct the campaign. So for the state rep position, as you've heard, you raise a small amount of money, 5,000 or 6,000, and you get another 30 to spend, and everybody gets the same amount to spend. Whereas for first selectman, in theory, you could raise $1 bazillion and the other guy may not raise any, and so that changes the way things work. But also for the first selectman's race, it seemed to be there was constant fundraising. Everywhere you went, someone thought, they got their hands on their wallet, trying either to pull it out or to not pull it out to help fund you, as the case may be. And whereas here, you got to a point where you said, well, I've reached the goal. I qualified for the amount of money. And guess what? I don't have to ask you for money anymore. So you don't have to put your hand in your pocket, kind of thing. So as I say, it changed the dynamics and the conversation involved in the whole campaign.
Well, I thank you for all your comments. Yes, Senator Cushing.
I want to say how pleased I am with our system, the citizen selection program. I really think it works. I have a funny story. My first, in 2018, when I was first running, I had qualified very quickly. And then I really had the opportunity to go out and talk to people. And so I approached this woman, quite much older woman, who allowed me into her house, but right away said, I'm not giving you any money. I said, well, I'm really not here to ask for money. I'm here to talk about the issues, the things I'm passionate about, my values. And no, I'm not going to give you any money. And I could not convince her that this was not the intention. So eventually I shared with her, the whole citizen program, and she was in awe. And it is so common that people think if you're running for office, you're going to ask them for money. And that sets a tone that I think none of us want to go down that road with folks. I think it's good to get money out of politics, no matter how we can do it. It should never be that our politics and our political life is guided by how much money you can raise or how much money you have. And so I would love to see this program extended rather, to other offices. Certainly there are municipalities that have similar programs around the country. I wish that we would see more municipalities forming these kinds of citizen election programs, because it really does ensure that anyone can run for office.
Well, between you and Senator Wong and others here have spoken, there are 2 issues here. The issue of the purse that one needs to raise, but there's also the issue of so-called dark money and who is contributing, and should we know where candidates are, from whom they're getting. There's a lot to talk about here, and with ranked voting. And I think I said that I would love to have some idea and feedback about programs that our chapter could do to educate voters. And it seems that these topics, the citizens election program and dark money and ranked voting, which was mentioned by Senator Wong, seem high on the list topics that would be beneficial for people, voters in general, to know more about. So we have just a little time left. So I have a question. And I think because we have very little time, I'm going to give you a sense of the questions I was going to ask and that are before us. Let me just check. Yes, I'm going to tell you the topics I was going to ask about, and if anyone would like to comment on any of them, I would appreciate it. So the topics I was going to ask you about were, are there any gun control issues which will be before the legislature this session? What are the primary health care issues that the state faces? And that's a good one, I guess, to ask in a nutshell. Housing has been in the news frequently as a controversial issue. And also the idea of labor shortages. We talked about this a year ago in this program about recruiting and keeping workers for our businesses. So if any of you would like to comment, gun control, healthcare, housing, or labor, the condition of labor, any of those four issues, if anyone would like to speak to any of them.
All of us, for all of us, and we have 5 minutes. I mean, each one of these could be like a 2-hour discussion. They're
One
talk
for a
about
minute.
complex. But
Mhm.
you know, I'm in the Judiciary Committee. I'm kind of the grandfather of gun responsibility laws since passage of the first Kids and Guns bill back in 1990. I know, talking to the leadership of the Judiciary Committee, there's going to be bills where I'm looking at things with ghost guns. I'm looking for numbers on ammunition. The governor has said he's going to propose a ban on assault style weapons. I'm of two minds of that. We'll see how the debate goes. Because we already have had outlawed the civilian ownership of assault weapons back in '94, I think it was, and required and grandfathered people who owned them, but they had to register. So the state knows where those are. Housing, one of the biggest obstacles to economic development is, gee, I'd love to open my business here in Connecticut, but there's no place for my workers to live.
Mhm.
And sadly, I think that we're up against a lot of racism when we start talking about housing. We don't want those people to move into our town, kind of thing, which really annoys me. And this whole, and I think it's a bad idea of repealing the 830G. Danbury has met the requirements of 830G. It's a matter of suburban towns got to kind of pony up and deal with that. Nonprofits are having the same problem as the state and with municipal agencies for getting employees. I've submitted a series of bills for the Nonprofit Alliance. We'll see how that goes. Health and mental health. Yeah, again, I don't think we have the time to actually talk about those. They are issues where the committees of cognizance are going to focus this year. And I'm hoping to see a collaborative, bipartisan discussion of a lot of these issues. And I'm grateful that the League certainly has been very good, obviously, on election-related issues. I'd love to have you tackle housing. So that's kind of my several-minute discussion of what should take like 4 hours.
Well, we have no dearth of topics that the League can do for our voter education. Yes, Senator Krishnan.
I am going to have to jump off, and I did want to say before I leave, I mean, I agree with Representative Godfrey. There isn't enough time to address all of those important issues that you mentioned, but they are going to be taken up in many different forms this legislative session. And I think you'll be seeing much more detail as the bills come out of committee and we start really focusing on
Gotcha.
public hearings. So I
saw that.
say, before I hop off, I have another event that I have to travel to, so I want to have plenty of time to get there, but I want to say how much I appreciate you hosting this today. And we always look forward to this conversation with the League of Women Voters of Northern Fairfield County. So thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you.
I will quickly add that, Representative Godfrey, I learned a lot from him, and I think one of the things is going to be all of these issues will be vetted. But my hope is that with the one-party rule and the significant majority, that the Republicans will have a seat at the table and have a very earnest bipartisan collaborative discussion. The idea of, one-party rule, one decision-making, one perspective does not work. It doesn't work in the federal government, doesn't work in state legislature, doesn't work in my household. So my hope is that we will have both parties and multiple viewpoints at the table during these discussions. I think another critical part is discussing housing. We're unique in the aspect of the town of various 169 towns in our community. Housing is an absolute critical crisis need in our communities, in all of our communities, urban, suburban, and rural. That being said, I think using racial dynamics and exclusionary, yes, 30 years ago, that might have been a factor, but we have to look at some of the real facts in regards to density considerations and where affordable housing can be facilitated. We have environmental impact. The idea of high density housing near Candlewood Lake, near water reservoirs. I represent a town of Easton that has nearly 80% of its land being watershed. How are you going to build high density housing? It's not an issue of exclusion. It's an issue of environmental and ecological consideration. So when we go into this discussion about housing, how do we find solutions? The solutions cannot be state government and a one party, one rule, one size fits all solution. Bob and I may disagree on that, and I respect them greatly, but the conversation has to be, you have to incorporate feedback from suburban and rural settings, and that the challenge, I think the solution is not from the state dictating it. It has to be a collaborative effort between local governance, state governance, and federal governance. If you look back into the late 70s, in which many of our diverse and accessible, diverse housing occurred, it was done collaboratively. The 830G legislation, now 30 years ago, focused on private developers creating affordable housing dynamics. That has created an accelerated challenge and unevenness. So I'm open to the discussion. I truly am. I know there's a crisis need, but if it's a topic of conversation, it cannot be a one size fits all where state government says it knows best for every community. Each community is unique, and it shouldn't be a racial and social equity discussion. That may be part of it, but it has to be environmental. It has to be a density consideration, has to be a quality of life consideration. So it's a topic of conversation that I welcome, but nevertheless, it cannot be a one size fits all, one party dictate to the ideas and the representative values and priorities of people in the community.
Yes, Senator Chalesky and Barcelo,
Yes.
would you like to comment on any of those topics that I asked? about?
Yes, I will say that one size fits all. I mean, you could apply that to all issues and matters faced at the state level, and a balance of power. There's just more room for compromise and better representation. I will say very briefly on, there are, I believe, loopholes that we can close around gun control that Representative Godfrey touched upon. Ghost guns certainly, and but also strengthening, the background check process is what I heard in speaking with neighbors, and housing. It's so important to provide for our communities, and even though Danbury has met and even exceeded, which I'm proud of, the state requirements is still not enough. We were just speaking with the Nonprofits Alliance and how, they're they, staffing is an issue in every industry. But that's important when we're looking to retain, attract, and hire staff for every industry, not just nonprofits, but our schools, our first responders, and the like. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I appreciate the conversation. As a new legislator, I'll continue to just be an ear. I'm more of a listener rather than a speaker. And thank you very much.
Yes, yes,
If I can just add here,
yes.
boy, you really saved the complex questions for last.
Well, if you only want to
But-
speak one, I just wanted you to know issues that had been raised,
Oh,
not
sure.
necessarily along, when you go back to Hartford, what's on people's minds.
Yeah, we've heard all of the above throughout the campaign, and we continue to hear about them. And I know just one, because we'll save the rest for another discussion here.
Another time.
But
Mhm.
healthcare issue, seniors, big issue. The youngest members of our population, also a big issue. We want to give some help with those, but there's room for discussion on all of the topics that you mentioned, and I'm sure we'll get to them throughout the course of this term, we'll say. So thank you for asking the questions, and we'll continue. To be continued at another meeting, I guess.
Okay.
Thanks again.
Thank you. I had one last question come in the chat box, and this will be a one-sentence response. Because of time consideration, we did touch on it briefly a while ago, but do you think that there's a chance that there will be a conversation this spring in the legislature about the possibility of introducing ranked voting procedures in Connecticut? Not this year, but in the near future. We had some members who were concerned about hearing. So just a sentence or two. Do you think it'll be discussed in this session of the legislature?
Yeah,
I
it will be
think-
discussed, but
Go ahead.
my crystal ball is in hock, so I can't tell you what the outcome is going to be when we get to June.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it'll be discussed. It remains to be seen. I worked with elections in New York City for a while, and I had questions about that whole process. So we need to go through it, look at it in detail, vet it, and more on that complex question later.
Maybe next year.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. Well, I think I don't see any more questions from people who are, oh, yes, Senator Wong.
No, I'll be quick. It will certainly be discussed, and we welcome everybody's input. As I mentioned earlier, in a bipartisan proposal, Senator Austin and myself did propose a ranked choice voting bill in the Government Administration Elections Committee. Our hope is that it will be raised for discussion. The more we discuss it, the more we vet it. I think we have a better product from both sides of the aisle. I think the other critical thing is ultimately for those people that we aren't able to see that are participating, thank you very much for listening in. If there's any questions you have for me, I would welcome being able to give you my website. It's Senator Huang, HWANG.com. Feel free to send information and ask any further questions to your league members. The other thing I want to leave on a personal note, Happy Lunar New Year to everyone.
Yes,
Thank
yes.
you. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the input you've given to us. I have to give a shout out to my husband, who is my technical computer expert, who's the man behind the curtain. And without him, I wouldn't be able to do this. We wouldn't be able to do. So thank you, Russ. Good job. And thank you all for being here. And I know we will have a profitable, thoughtful, productive spring in Hartford. At least I can say that with confidence from the legislatures that come from our neck of the woods. So thank you very much, all of you, for being here this morning. We really appreciate your time because you're so busy right now. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Take care.
Okay.